many future generations. Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to share this, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from North Carolina.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the Senate floor today for a reason I never dreamed would be needed. Recently, there have been a series of articles published in the media that have described and in some cases provided extensive details about highly classified unilateral and joint intelligence operations, including covert actions. To describe these leaks as troubling and frustrating is by all standards an understatement. They're simply inexcusable criminal acts that must stop and must stop now. Our intelligence professionals, our allies, and most importantly, the American people deserve better than this. I understand that there are ongoing efforts within the House and Senate, of which I'm part of, to address these leaks through legislation, and that the Director of National Intelligence has implemented some administrative steps to investigate these leaks. I support those efforts, but I also believe that special attention needs to be drawn to unauthorized disclosures relating to covert actions. And so today, I have introduced the Deterring Public Disclosure Covert Action Act of 2012. This act will ensure that those who disclose or talk about covert actions by the United States will no longer be eligible for a federal government security clearance. It's novel. It's very simple. If you talk about covert actions, you'll have your clearance revoked and you will never get another one. This is not a bill that any member should ever have to introduce. Covert actions are, by their very definition, supposed to be kept quiet. Those who engage in them, those who support them, and those who work to get them authorized all know that. Yet those rules, those very laws that are supposed to protect classified information, are being disregarded with few repercussions, even though each one of those leaks undermines the hard work of our intelligence officers, puts lives at risk, and jeopardizes our relationship with overseas partners. As I said in this chamber last month, I strongly believe that those leakers are violating the trust of the American people. Those who are given access to classified information, especially covert actions, are given the same responsibility we as members have. As long as something is classified, you don't talk about it. In other words, keep your mouth shut. Yet month after month, we see articles about covert action that quote a wide range of U.S. officials, mostly anonymous, and often senior administration officials. While this act focuses on covert action, it in no way minimizes the importance of maintaining the secrecy of other types of classified information. Those who leak any classified information should no longer be trusted with our nation's secrets. But I believe that the damage that is being done to our covert action programs by these leaks deserves special attention today. The Act also ensures that any determination that an individual has leaked information about covert action will be made only in accordance with the applicable law or regulation. In short, no one will lose his clearance without appropriate due process. I believe that's an important requirement, as losing clearance often means losing your livelihood. Today, I'm taking one step to silence those who may have done irreparable harm by putting their own personal agendas above their colleagues and, most importantly, their country. We cannot afford to wait for more leaks, more compromised covert actions. The bill I've introduced today may target only one part of the problem, but I believe it is an essential part of a solution. I urge my colleagues in the days and weeks to come to be supportive of this piece of legislation. I think it's a small thing to ask of those who are entrusted with our nation's most important secrets, that they actually keep them secret, or we take that ability away to be entrusted with that information. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. O'Connor.
The pending business in the Senate is a Democratic bill that would lower taxes for companies that hire new workers, give raises, or buy new equipment this year. House Speaker John Boehner and Senator Rob Portman of Ohio spoke at the Associated Builders and Contractors Conference in Washington this morning. The National Journal writes that the two Republicans slammed President Obama for raising taxes on small businesses and employing class warfare tactics when he called on Congress to let the Bush-era tax cuts expire for households earning less than $250,000 a year. You can see what they said at about 8 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN 2 if the Senate is out. We see a tweet there from Representative Lankford about debate that's happening on the House floor right now on a repeal of the 2010 health care law. The House chamber is about 2 hours, 15 minutes into debate this afternoon. Representatives are expected to use most of the 5 hours of debate time today and continue the debate tomorrow before voting on the measure. National Journal writes that Republicans say that several Democratic members of Congress with tough re-election campaigns may back a House bill aimed at repealing President Obama's health care legislation.
The article highlights child marriages around the world, a human rights atrocity that steals the future, the health and the lives of little girls and even boys in many developing countries. In many of these countries, girls are treated like chattel or commodities, sold into marriage with older men to settle debts or for dowries to help families survive. In Niger, the focus of the Post article, a famine is raising fears that more families will turn to that practice, marry off their little girls to gain economic security and even survival. Niger happens to already have the world's highest prevalence of child marriage, with 1 out of 2 girls marrying before the age of 15, some as young as 7. Can you imagine? Women, look around you. If you see another woman, know that in Niger, one of you would have been married before you were 15 years old. That's exactly what happened to Balki Souli. Balki was married at 12 years of age. And let me show this poster of her here. She's now 14. She recently lost her first child during childbirth at age 14. She almost died herself. Her small body was just too frail to handle the difficulty of facing labor. While Niger has the world's highest rate of child marriage, it's not the only place this scourge occurs. It can be found all over the world, and most prevalently in Africa and Southern Asia. Recently, the Senate acted to ensure that the United States government is adequately addressing this global human rights tragedy by passing the International Protecting Girls by Preventing Child Marriage Act. Senator Olympia Snowe and I were joined by a bipartisan group of 34 senators in introducing this legislation. We've now passed this legislation in the Senate not once, but twice. Unfortunately, despite the bipartisan support for this bill in the Senate, the Republican leadership in the House refuses to act on this legislation. With every day that failure in the House continues, more and more little girls around the world like Balki are forced into early marriage. This means more girls in developing countries will lose their freedom, have their childhood innocence stolen, and may in fact lose their lives. It means more young girls will be forced into sexual relationships with men 2 or 3 times their age. And it means more girls will suffer the devastating and often deadly health consequences that accompany forced child marriage, sexually transmitted disease, birth complications for the child and for the mother. That's not what America stands for. I'm calling on Speaker Boehner, Majority Leader Cantor, and House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ileana Ros-Lehtman to bring this bill to a vote in the House immediately. Read the article. Consider the photographs in the Post and other places. The lives of these girls in developing countries across the world are literally in your hands. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Okaka.
Mr. President,
The Assistant Majority Leader,
ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Mr. President, 11 years ago I introduced the DREAM Act. It was legislation to allow a select group of young immigrant students with great potential to be a bigger part of America. The DREAM Act gives these students a chance to earn their way into legal status. It isn't automatic. They have to come to the United States as children, be long-term residents, have good moral character, graduate from high school, and complete at least 2 years of college or military service. It has a strong history of bipartisan support over the 11 years. I first introduced it with Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, my Republican lead sponsor when it first was introduced. When the Republicans last controlled the Congress, the DREAM Act passed the Senate on a 62-36 vote, with 23 Republicans voting yes. It was part of comprehensive immigration reform. Unfortunately, that bill didn't pass. The Republican support for the DREAM Act diminished for political reasons, and the vast majority of Democrats, despite our support, can't stop a Republican filibuster when the bill's been called for consideration since. Well, I'm still committed to the DREAM Act and committed to work with any Republican or any Democrat who wants to help me pass this important legislation. But even though we have to wait on Congress to act, these young people who would be benefited from the DREAM Act can't wait any longer. Unfortunately, many are now being deported, or at least they were. They don't remember where they're being deported to, and they certainly, in many instances, don't even speak the language. Those who are still here are at risk of deportation themselves. They can't get a job and find it difficult to go to school. They have no support from the government in terms of their education. That's why President Obama and Homeland Secretary Janet Napolitano decided that the Obama administration would no longer deport young people who were eligible for the DREAM Act. Instead, the administration said they would permit these students to apply for a form of relief known as deferred action, which puts on hold deportations and allows them on a temporary, renewable basis to live and work in America. I strongly, strongly support this decision. I think it will go down in history as one of the more significant civil rights decisions of our era, and I salute President Obama for his courage in reaching this conclusion. Remember, the students we're talking about didn't come to this country because of a family decision. They were brought here as babies and children. As Secretary Napolitano said, immigrants who were brought here illegally as children, quote, lacked the intent to violate the law, end of quote. It's not the American way to punish kids for their parents' wrongdoing. The Obama administration's new policy will make America a stronger country by giving these talented immigrants a chance to contribute more fully to the economy. Studies have found that DREAM Act students could contribute literally trillions of dollars to the U.S. economy during their working lives. They'll be our future doctors and engineers and soldiers and teachers. They'll make us a stronger nation. Let me be very clear. The Obama administration's new policy is clearly lawful and appropriate. Throughout our history, the government has decided whom they will prosecute and whom they will not, based on law enforcement priorities and available resources. Previous administrations of both political parties have made those decisions on deportations, and the Supreme Court recognizes the right of a president to decide what agency will make a decision to prosecute or not prosecute. And listen to what the Supreme Court said in a recent opinion on Arizona's immigration law, and I quote, "A principal feature of the removal system is the broad discretion exercised by immigration officials. Discretion in the enforcement of immigration law embraces immediate human concerns," end of quote. The administration's policy isn't just legal, it's smart and realistic. There are millions of undocumented immigrants in the country. It would take literally billions of dollars to deport all of them. It will never happen. So the Department of Homeland Security has to set priorities. The Obama administration has established a deportation policy that makes it a high priority to deport those who committed crimes, serious crimes, or maybe a threat to public safety. And the administration said it is not a high priority to deport DREAM Act students. I think the administration has its priorities right. And this is an amnesty. It's simply a decision to focus limited government resources on those who have committed serious crimes and to basically say to DREAM Act students, you have an opportunity to remain here in a legally recognized temporary and renewable status. That policy has strong support in Congress. It was Richard Lugar, Republican of Indiana, who joined me 2 years ago in writing to President Obama to ask him to do this. Last year, Senator Lugar and I were joined by 21 other senators who stood together with us, like Majority Leader Harry Reid, Judiciary Committee Chairman Patrick Leahy, and Senator Bob Menendez. According to recent polls, the American people think the president made the right decision. For example, a Bloomberg poll found that 64% of likely voters, including 66% of independents, support the president's policy on DREAM Act students, compared to 30%, less than half, who oppose it. Some Republicans outside Congress have also expressed support. For example, Mark Shurtleff, Attorney General of Utah, said, and I quote, "This is clearly within the president's power. I was pleased when he announced, until Congress acts, we'll be left with too many people to deport. The administration is saying, here's a group we could be spending our resources going after, but why? They're Americans. They see themselves as Americans. They love this country." End of quote. From Mark Shurtleff, Attorney General of Utah. It's easy to criticize the president's policy on the DREAM Act in the abstract. What I've tried to do on a regular basis is to introduce those who follow the Senate proceedings to the actual students who are affected by this. One of them is Kelsey Burke. Brought to the United States from Honduras at the age of 10, her family settled in Lake Worth, Florida, where she started school in the 6th grade. By the time she was in 8th grade, she was taking advanced placement classes. She was accepted into the Criminal Justice Magnet Program at Lake Worth High School. She developed a passion for the law, started to dream about becoming an attorney. She continued to take honors classes, enrolled in college at Palm Beach State College. She graduated from high school with a 3.4 GPA, a criminal justice certificate, and already 15 college credits. In 2008, Kelsey was granted temporary protected status, which allows immigrants to remain in the United States temporarily because it's unsafe for them to return to their home country. With temporary protected status, Kelsey's able to work legally, although she's still not eligible to stay here permanently or become a citizen. After she began working, Kelsey was able to afford college. Keep in mind, Kelsey and other DREAM Act students are not eligible for federal student loans or any other federal financial aid. Going to college for them is tougher than it is for most kids. While working full-time, Kelsey went to Florida Atlantic University, graduating with a major in public communications and a minor in sociology. She was indeed the first member of her family to graduate from high school and college. She now works as a paralegal at a law firm in Palm Beach County. She's very active in her community, serves on the board of the Hispanic Bar Association, volunteers in her neighborhood community center, and coaches youth soccer. Her dream is to become a U.S. citizen, and she wants to be an attorney. Of course, not being a citizen, there's an obstacle to her ever becoming a member of the legal profession in this country. Here's what she said when she wrote to me. "I desire to help others pursue their passion, fight for their dreams, make a positive difference. Others forgot where they came from and how their ancestors got here and what coming to America represents. I've been blessed, and I want to use my knowledge and experience to help other immigrant families." End of quote. Mr. President, I am the child of one of those immigrants. My mother was an immigrant to this country. I now have been honored to serve in the United States Senate, a first-generation American. I am proud of my mother's immigrant heritage and my heritage as well. Up in my office behind my desk is my mother's naturalization certificate. At about age 23, she became a citizen. And I keep that certificate there as a reminder about my family roots and a reminder about this great country. It's the immigrant contribution to America that adds to our diversity, gives us strength, and I think brings a lot of special people to our shores who are willing to make great sacrifices to be part of this great nation. These young people affected by the DREAM Act were too young to make that conscious decision, but the parents who brought them here they were making that decision for them. Now we want these young people to have a chance in their generation to make this a stronger nation. I asked my colleagues, would we be better off if Kelsey were asked to leave? I don't think so. I think her having grown up in this country and overcome so many odds is an indication of what a strong-willed and talented young woman she is. We need so many more just like her. The President has given Kelsey and others some breathing space here with his decision on the DREAM Act. Now it's time for us to accept the responsibility not only to deal with the DREAM Act, but also to deal with the immigration question. We cannot run away from the fact that it is unresolved and has been for years. We need to work together on a bipartisan basis to make certain that we have an immigration system that is fair, reasonable, will continue to build this great nation of immigrants, bringing to the shores of this country those who have made such a difference in the past and will in the future. I thank all my colleagues, including the presiding officer, for his strong support of the DREAM Act. The President's decision has given us a new opportunity to introduce these young people to America in a legal protected status on a renewable basis. Mr. President, I yield the floor and to my colleague from Ohio.
President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I so appreciate the leadership of Senator Durbin on the DREAM Act. Nobody has kept this alive more than he has spoken more passionately and cares more about young people. And the point of so much of what he was talking about was that you give people an opportunity and they work hard and they play by the rules and they get ahead in this country. And my comments, while I didn't come to the floor to talk about immigration and the DREAM Act, I support what Senator Durbin's doing. And I'm talking about something else, that you give people opportunity and they get ahead, and that is Ohio and American manufacturing and why it's so important to our country. The best ticket to the middle class in the last 100 years in the state of Ohio and really all over the country has been people making things. The way to create wealth is you either mine it or you grow it or you make it. The presiding officer in his state of Colorado, he understands all of those three things. In Colorado, they mine things, they grow things, they make things, as they do in Ohio. Ohio is increasingly becoming an energy state in many ways. We're a leading farm state. It's actually our biggest job, our biggest industry in a sense in Ohio is agriculture. We also are the #3 manufacturing state in the United States of America. Only Texas and California make more things than Ohio does. They're states 2 and 3 times our size in population and an area even more than that. And we know a couple of things. We know that from 2000 to 2010, we lost 1/3 of the manufacturing jobs in this country. We lost more than 5 million manufacturing jobs disappeared. Tens of thousands of plant closings, thousands of communities abandoned or crippled, teachers laid off, librarians laid off, police and fire laid off, families broken because of these manufacturing job losses. More than 5 million manufactured jobs lost in manufacturing 2000-2010. Since early 2010, we have now have 500,000 more jobs than we had in early 2010. In other words, for the first time in a decade, we're actually seeing manufacturing job gains in this country. A big part of that is what's happened to the auto industry. I spent much of last week all over my state, but especially visiting places in northern Ohio where manufacturing and especially auto is so important. I talked to business owners who are grateful and enthusiastic about what happened with the auto rescue. The auto industry was literally dying in Ohio and across the country at this point 4 years ago in late 2008, early 2009. And if the United States Congress, the President, and the Senate, House and Senate hadn't stepped in, my state would be in a depression. Since then, we are seeing major investments in many cases, meaning hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, tens of millions minimum, major investments in Ohio in Chrysler, Toledo, major investments in Ohio in GM, major investments in Ohio in Ford, and major investments in Ohio in Honda. All of them understanding the auto industry is alive and well and coming back. But many of these auto suppliers, the companies that make brackets or bolts or wheel covers or glass or a number of other products that ultimately go into auto assembly, many of these manufacturers component manufacturers of parts for the auto industry talk about competing against China. For too long, they tell me, and I recognize China has been manipulating its currency to give Chinese exports an unfair advantage. The Chinese government also gives illegal subsidies to domestic industries, domestic in China, for the purpose of exporting and dumping products in the American market. The term dumping simply means they subsidize it so the product itself is priced under the cost of producing it. It's called dumping it in our market. China, if that wasn't enough, skirted trade law even further by placing illegal duties that affect more than 80% of U.S. auto exports to China, including Ohio-made vehicles like the Jeep assembled in Toledo and Acuras assembled in Marysville. We can't afford to let China take the wind out of our sails. Last week, the administration stepped the day after Independence Day. The administration announced it would stand up for American workers. It would fight back against China's discriminatory tariffs on American automobiles. When they put illegal under international trade law, when they put illegal tariffs on American products, it means they basically keep prices so high for American-made autos, artificially high, that the Chinese simply won't buy them. Chinese motorists won't buy them. So they, in effect, by these tariffs, have kept American products made by American workers, made in the United States of America, keeping them out of China. We buy so much from China, not hard to find products at any store in America almost made in China. We buy so many of their products. They do all they can, illegally in many cases, to keep our products out. Now's the time to stand up for American workers, to stand up for suppliers in Dayton who provide aluminum and zinc, for casting, for aluminum and zinc die casting, workers in Defiance, Ohio, who specialize in heavy gauge steel for our domestic auto industry. That's why the President's decision, the United States Trade Representative's decision aimed at defending American jobs is so important. We know what rescuing the auto industry meant for us. It was not only about preventing crisis, but it could have been an economic depression, especially in the industrial Midwest. Hundreds of thousands of Ohioans depend on the auto industry, workers, suppliers, manufacturers, drivers, truckers, sales representatives, dealerships. For those of us in Congress who supported rescuing the auto industry, doing so meant standing up for the hundreds of thousands of Ohioans and hundreds of thousands of Americans, as much as it was about supporting the big three. Today, the domestic auto industry is back on course. GM's a leading car company in the world. It's earning significant profits. As I said, plants in Toledo and Lordstown and Defiance are hiring workers. Honda, Chrysler, Ford, GM have all announced those various multi-million-dollar investments just in Ohio alone, not to mention the many other states that I mentioned earlier. We've got to continue making the investments in manufacturing that matter for our recovery and our economic competitiveness. I was just on a conference call with rural housing advocates in Ohio. We know historically in this country that what leads us out of depression are two things, manufacturing and housing. We're doing significantly better in manufacturing. Remember earlier in my short little talk that we lost 5 million manufacturing jobs from 2000 to 2010. We've gained 500,000 since then, including in Ohio almost every single month over the last 30 months or so. Manufacturing is doing its part to pull us out of this recession. We've got to do better in housing. That's a subject for another discussion, but the manufacturing part is so important. One place we must remain vigilant is the enforcement of trade laws. That's what the President's standing up and doing. We know that enforcing trade law isn't just the right thing to do for manufacturing, it's the right thing to do for job creation. International Trade Commission's ruling in December 2009 led to a measure on imports to support domestic producers of steel pipe like V&M Star Steel in Youngstown. By addressing illegal Chinese trade practices, this decision helped increase demand for domestic production. It played a significant role in V&M Star's decision to do something that people didn't expect would happen anytime soon. V&M Star Steel made a decision to build a new $650 million seamless pipe mill in Youngstown, Ohio, bringing I believe, about 1,000 building trades jobs, building the structure of the plant, and now several hundred jobs as they begin production. A new steel plant in Youngstown, Ohio, one of the major steel producing centers in the country that had come on hard times, particularly in steel. A new steel mill in Youngstown, Ohio, because the President of the United States, because the International Trade Commission, because the Department of Commerce, because Congress pushed for it, actually enforced trade rules, and look what happened. So trade enforcement matters. We also need to be vigilant on currency manipulation. Our trade deficit in auto parts with China grew from about $1 billion 10 years ago to almost $10 billion today. These massive illegal subsidies the Chinese are engaging in are worsened by indirect predatory subsidies like currency manipulation. That's why my legislation, the Currency Exchange and Oversight Reform Act, the largest bipartisan jobs bill that's passed the Senate in the last 2 years, is so important. It got more than 70 votes. Senators in both parties supported it. The House of Representatives had passed a similar measure one other time. Now we're simply asking Speaker Boehner to schedule this bill for a vote. If it's scheduled for a vote, if the House votes on it, they will pass it. I would predict with at least 300 votes, because large numbers of members of both parties want to see the House of Representatives move on this. They voted for it before. We need Speaker Boehner to actually bring it to a vote. It means standing up for American jobs when China cheats. Without aggressive enforcement of trade law, this unlevel playing field will cost hundreds of thousands of American jobs. It's born from the realization the stakes are too high for our workers, our manufacturers, our economy if we don't fight back. We need an all-hands-on-deck approach at the U.S. Trade Rep, at the Department of State, at the Department of Commerce, to be involved and more aggressive, especially by initiating more trade actions. We know that our trade actions stabilize. We know that our actions stabilize the auto industry. We know that enforcement of trade law translates into steel jobs and paper jobs and tire jobs and other jobs. And we know it's time to continue fighting for and investing in American manufacturing. Thank you, Mr. President. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 433, S.Res. 429.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 433, S.Res. 429, supporting the goals and ideals of World Malaria Day.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Wicker amendment at the desk be agreed to.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate in this measure and urge its passage.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be made and laid upon the table, and that any statements related to the resolution appear at this point in the record.
Without objection.
I understand that S3369, introduced earlier today by Senator Whitehouse, is at the desk. I ask for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
S3369, a bill to amend the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 and so forth and for other purposes.
I ask for its second reading and object to my own request.
Objection having been heard, the bill will receive its second reading on the next legislative day.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that S3240, the Agriculture Reform, Food and Jobs Act of 2012, be printed as posted.
Without objection.
President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, July 11th, that following the prayer and pledge, the Journal of Proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, that the majority leader be recognized, and that the first hour be divided equally and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half, the majority controlling the second half, and that all time during morning business adjournment and recess count post-cloture on the motion to proceed to S2237.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we hope to begin consideration of the Small Business Jobs and Tax Relief Act tomorrow. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today moved forward on a one-year payroll tax credit. It